We are now in chapter 10. I'm going over the section Medieval Civilization, the Rise of Western Europe. And this chapter is full of many important details and in a sense also quite a bit to kind of digest. So what I'm going to do with this lecture, these set of lectures is, as always, I assume that you're reading the text and that I want to focus on certain aspects that are seen in the text. So, I occasionally will remind you that as I go over what I'm going over, I'm not filling in all the gaps of some of the things that I'm discussing, and I'm not going to cover everything, even in the PowerPoints. I just want to emphasize certain things that are not being brought out in the text, and hope this is a complement to it for you. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to move to. All right. The issue of the agricultural revolution is very significant. And when it comes to economic history, I myself have never really been super into economic history because that's just not my thing. And that's the interesting thing about history is you can focus on different things. And some are more interesting than others. But just because we take interest in certain things as opposed to others doesn't mean something isn't more significant. And in fact, I would argue that even though I'm a person that gravitates towards interest in ideologies and religious and political texts from different time periods, intellectual history is something that really fascinates me. But I would argue, despite that that's what I find the most interesting, I think that has less to do with things and change than with some of the innovations, technological and economic factors. And that's a debated position to take. But I agree with it in the sense that, we don't think about the fact of how much food, for example, in America, let's just take the United States, it's assumed we have a right to 3 meals a day. It's assumed we have a right to have snacks and that we should have immediate access to clean water. And, we thrive. But now, a drought comes in California and it becomes a state of panic naturally. But many parts of the world that are underdeveloped, people have an average of 1 meal a day. In Rwanda, I knew a fellow teacher who went to go visit Rwanda and do some work out there, and many of the people it was common to have 1 meal a day in some of the poorest villages. And these are not thriving villages. And intellectually they're not thriving. Well, it's not because they're not capable. If you're starving, if you're constantly just trying to find a way to make ends meet, you don't have time to pursue anything else. So your ability to get food, your ability to have resources is going to affect everything. And in fact, what we just saw in this chapter is that the agricultural revolution really creates a baby boom. And obviously, if more people can live longer, live healthier, then you're going to have a significant change in culture, okay? And so just to kind of give you a heads up on even the way historians look at this, there's different models that historians use to kind of reflect on. But one can make an argument that when one writes a text or a book, or there's a certain type of entertainment or whatever, that if material conditions change and allow more people to be exposed to that book, exposed to that form of entertainment, then was it the entertainment in the book that influenced the people, or what was more relevant was the fact that those people began to have access to it? In other words, creation of literacy and so on. I hope I'm not losing you too much in seeming like I'm going off topic, I just kind of want to draw out the attention that when it comes to what makes societies thrive or not thrive, um, it doesn't always necessarily, mean what it is that they quote unquote know, but it's also a lot of things that they have. And here, the metal horseshoes, for example, and having a field system where you don't over farm one particular soil, that you actually let it have a break and can go back to it. That was all important. And then, on the other hand, you also had a system that, although, it was mentioning that peasants and serfs were not necessarily slaves, you did have people really bogged down and essentially slaves to the land and the system. And just think about the exposure you're allowed to get, even in this class, to the world. Imagine that you're a serf that lives out a decent life, hardworking, but lives till like you're 50 or 60. But all you were ever exposed to was that area. And so you had a lot of people that were still tied down in that way. That's the other side of this as well. But I just kind of wanted to point out those factors, and I also want to apologize. I have a cold or something. So, anyways, okay. So I'm just going to move on to discussing. Also, I want to talk about migration. Okay, so you'll notice the text on page 300. It talked about, as there was the baby boom, then you had less land available and people needing to leave. And you had a series of mass migrations. Mass migrations always happen. And they happen for economic reasons for the most part. War is the other factor. But for instance, in the United States, why are there so many people coming from Mexico that are migrating in, legally or not? Well, if your society doesn't have upward mobility, if you can't move up, you move out, and you take care. Canada and the United States doesn't have that issue because they have almost the same income level. But I guarantee you that if the economic status of the United States became as problematic as the economic disparity between the wealthy and the poor in Mexico, the majority of Americans, legally or illegally, would go into Canada. And so this is just a natural thing that occurs in all societies. And the immigration population often finds themselves in a hostile territory. But when there's a need, there's a need. And sometimes even facing that hostility, one's going to do it because it's got to have food and you got to have a place to stay, right? So I just wanted to point that out as well. And actually, I'm going to skip over this part. So here we're just taking a look at European trade routes. And you can start seeing this development here. And I just kind of want to end this here by just looking at a map and reminding ourselves of, since we're in the United States, of the kind of proximity that all these different nations in Western Europe have to each other. I will always try to emphasize the closeness relatively that they have towards each other, because the United States is so big, and that we're one country, United States, And then you look at European countries that are relatively smaller and all packed next to each other. Okay, and so I think it's always kind of good to visualize that the West develops out of that context, from those coming from a former colony of a European nation. I will end this lecture here.